Hello and welcome to the Essential Property Podcast with your hosts, Paul Samuda and Amanda Woodward. With 45 years of combined experience in the world of property buying, selling, investing and developing, they are here to share with you their knowledge in the Stoke-on-Trent, Newcastle-under-Lyme and Crewe property market. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Essential Property Podcast with your hosts Amanda Woodward and Paul Samuda. And today we are going to be taking a deep dive on all things financial when it comes to the property world. So we're going to be kicking off talking about mortgages. We will also be talking about mortgage valuations and refinances, along with negotiations of contracts and some other bits and pieces thrown in along the way. What prompted the episode this evening was I was listening to Paul on a call with our broker and talking about a mortgage application that we're just going through at the moment. And it just reminded me that going for a mortgage now it seems to be a little bit different than it was a few years back. A few more considerations, slightly higher interest rates and fees and so on. So I thought I'd bring Paul in just to share with us how he makes his decision-making process, or what process he follows when we apply for a mortgage to purchase a property or a mortgage to refinance a property. He was also speaking with some investing partners earlier on this evening, also on a similar subject. So I thought if it's on our mind, if it's on our investors' minds, then no doubt it's on our listeners' minds as well. So over to you, Paul, to kick off with the process of applying for mortgages and how you work that out in your mind.
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, that's a very interesting area. And you're right, things have become a little bit more complex, basically because interest rates have gone through the roof over the last year and a half, 2 years. The Bank of England has gone from a base rate of 0.1% up to a base rate of 5.25%, which is a 50-odd fold increase. And, historically, we were going from one fixed rate to another. It was either 2, 3 or 4% fixed rate, and you were happy with it for 5 years, didn't have anything to worry about. But now, obviously, things have changed. A number of landlords, ourselves included, are coming out of some 5-year fixed deals. And what's being presented is pretty horrible. So effectively, and before I jump into this, I need to stress this is not financial advice. This is just a process that we go through. You should always speak to your broker. But basically, where we've got a couple of mortgages that are maturing in terms of the fixed rates finished, and they were both around about 3.5% for a couple of HMOs. When I asked the broker to send me through the options, I saw 5s, 6s, and 7% as a interest rate. And on top of that, I saw 2, 3, 4, and 5% product fees. So this was an expensive proposition. Now, with HMOs, it's a little bit helpful that you can spread that cost over a number of rooms. But if you have a single let, then it's a whole different ballgame, because you have one tenant paying, that's the price they're paid. And unfortunately, you can't double their rent. But I always say the lenders are like, if you're a bit of a gambler and you go to a casino, it's, the house always wins. And lenders generally are like that. So they give you a number of options. Typically what we've done historically, we meaning just the landlords in general, is we've just said the headline rate is 3%, pucker rate, I worked out the cash flow, we'll make this much money over the next 5 years, let's go for 3%, 5-year fixed. You can no longer do that, because 6 is the new 3, or 3 is the new 6, or whichever way around it is. And on top of that, you've got a product fee. Now, again, the product fees historically have not been that high, and very few people pay the product fee. They roll it into the loan. What does that actually mean? It means that if you're borrowing a couple of $100,000 and the product fee is 3%, that's a £6,000 product fee. So, very few people are going to want to cut a check for £6,000 for a product fee. So what they say, add it to the loan. What does that actually mean? It means that the bank, the lender, has taken more of your equity, taken £6,000 of your equity. And not only has it taken £6,000 of your equity, it's charging you interest on it. So you calculate that over 10, 15, 20 years. That £16 compounded over 10, 15 years could turn into £15,000. And that is your equity. that the lender has attached itself to and taken. So sometimes it's unavoidable if you don't have the money to pay it off. So the product fees are now as important as the interest rate. So the exercise that I go through, currently I always start off by taking a view of what do I think is going to happen to interest rates going forward. Lenders take exactly the same view, and the whole interest rate swap market is based on projections. Now, lenders, like the house in a casino, will always stack things in their favor. And you have to calculate, what does that mean to you? Now, historically, the differences weren't that great, i.e., you go for 5-year fixed and you'll pay a little bit of a premium for that versus a 2-year fixed. And it was obvious which one you should go for based on your time horizon. But now when you work it out, there's not a great deal of difference. So it's almost as if the lenders are saying, heads we win, tails you lose. And that's a bit of a problem. So I take time out and I build a spreadsheet and I said, okay, I'm looking at a 2-year fixed or a 2-year tracker, because in the next 2 years, I'm expecting interest rates to reduce. Why am I expecting interest rate to reduce? Have I got a direct line into the Bank of England? No, but the Bank of England does produce a report every month in terms of their projections. Economists on all the financial programs, in all the financial sections of the newspapers, will give their view of interest rates going forward. And interest rates went up because inflation went through the roof. It's now back down to round about that 4% or just under that 4% mark. And it is expected to get back to the 2% level, which is where the Bank of England is judged and most comfortable. And that is expected to happen sometime between now and the summer. If inflation gets to 2%, then the bank is totally within its right to cut interest rates. So I read all the literature, I read all the reports, I read the economist forecast, and my view is that interest rates, if base rate's 5.25% now, by the summer of 2025, I think they're going to be around about 1.5 points cheaper. So round about 3.75. Now, if interest rates come down by 1.5%, do I want to be in a fixed rate mortgage for 5 years at 6%?
No, thank you.
Absolutely.
No,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Where do I want to be? What's the other option? And that depends. If your cash flow is tight when you look at the cash flow on your HMO, then you want to go for what on the surface looks like the cheapest monthly repayment. The cheapest monthly repayment is generally the longer tie-in and possibly the highest product fee. But you say, but at least I'm making money every month, so I'll go for that one. Often that can be a mistake. Not financial advice, but often it can be a mistake. So what I do, and I did this very, very recently on one of our mortgages, I create a spreadsheet which basically says, let me list all the different offers that are available from all the different lenders that have been provided by my broker. So I've already decided I'm going to go for a 2-year. So I get 2-year fixed, 75% mortgage, 80% mortgage, or 70% mortgage, whatever is an offer. I also get a 2-year tracker, or a 2-year variable, depending on what they call it. Different lenders call it different things. There's a rate attached to each of those things, and there's also a product fee. The reason why I'm looking at a tracker, I'm saying the nice thing about the tracker, although you still have a 2-year tie-in, if interest rates fall, your repayment falls as well. If base rate drops by 0.5%, then your repayment is going to drop by 0.5%. So they're recalculated every time, as opposed to a fixed mortgage where nothing changes. So what I want to do is calculate over the 2-year period, what's the difference between a 5% interest rate for a 2-year fix plus a 4% product fee on the amount I'm borrowing. When I add all those up, 24 months of interest payments plus the product fee, what is the total cost? And I do that for all the lenders at all the different rates. And I work out which is most cost effective. I also work out, well, what's my repayment? And a good example of this, I looked at one particular lender where my monthly repayment was 523. They had an interest rate of 5.1% and a product fee of 3%. My interest payment was 523. The total for the period was 16,236. That's 24 months of payments of 523 plus the product fee. The next lender closest to that, the total for the period was 16,700. The one after that was 17,195. And it went all the way up to the most expensive was a variable by one particular lender where the total over that 24-month period was 28,000.
Oh my goodness, what a difference.
Yeah. So what was that? A difference of £12,000, more than 60% more. Now, presumably that particular lender has said, you know what, we don't want to lend in this particular market, so we're going to make ourselves expensive. So whatever the reason is. But I looked at, if you look at the repayments, the cheapest monthly repayment was $496. And that was a 4.84% interest rate with a 5% product fee. So although the $496 monthly repayment was the lowest, the total of the 24 months was $18,056. So another £1,800 than the cheapest. So that's what I do. And then I go through and say, okay, fine, which one do I like the best? When I looked at the trackers, I say, what are people doing for trackers? The cheapest tracker was one at 7.25%, pretty pricey, a 2% product fee. The total repaid over the 2-year period will be $20,295. But over that period, we think that interest rate is going to drop by about 1.5%. Yeah. So that 1.5% reduction comes to about £1,800. So we take £1,800 away from, what is it? 20,295. That's about 18,400. So still a little bit pricey, so probably not worth going for. So the decision I made was actually to go for a 2-year fixed. So I'll lose out on any reductions. However, the net cost was still cheaper than if I went for a tracker or one of the other fixed rates.
And you don't know until you do the numbers.
You don't know until you do the numbers. And of course, you know, for people that are out there who maybe aren't as adept with spreadsheets and understanding the whole interest rate planning, you know, we're happy to do that for them. That's part of one of the services that we offer. But we think it's essential that we do that calculation because, you know, £1,000 here, £1,000 there, it adds up over a 10, 15-year mortgage. And you also need flexibility. I'm hoping that at the end of that 2-year cycle, interest rates will drop to, I'm saying, probably 3.75%. So when I do another fixed rate, I might say, you know what do I think is going to happen over the next 2-3 years? I think it might change by 0.5%. So maybe I'm happy to fix a 5% and I can get a 4.5% mortgage with hopefully a lower product fee. Yeah. So that's how we approach it. I've had a couple of conversations with landlords recently, bellyaching over this whole thing. And I said, you have to do the numbers. You have to do the numbers. So that's what you overheard, Amanda, when I'm speaking to the broker. I said this to the broker. I think the broker was, you know, probably a little bit taken aback at the level of detail I went into. But it's got to be done. We operate this as a business and we make decisions based on the number. It's all about the numbers.
And I think this also attests to the quality of the broker as well in terms of ensuring that they are presenting you with a number of different options, not perhaps just saying, you know, one shoe fits all or one size fits all, and looking at the different types of mortgages out there. This segues nicely into the second topic this evening with regards to mortgage valuations. So I had a scenario about a week and a half ago where one of our landlords who we managed the property for contacted us and said they had just gone for a refinance of a property. So they bought a small commercial building, converted it into a 6-bedroom all-en-suite, absolutely stunning HMO. They then had that property valued, and the valuer came round and valued it at £120,000. They were obviously rather upset at that valuation, and I was completely astonished because that valuation, we've actually refinanced something very similar, albeit about 3 or 4 years ago, and that valuation came in at 180. So I was certainly expecting something north of 200. So after we walked it through, I suggested that they go back to the broker, different lender, different valuer, let's go again. Yes, there's another valuation fee, but we needed to get this under the nose of the lender that had the appetite for HMOs, which not all do. We had to get it with a valuer that we thought would value it right. But I offered our service to the landlords and said, let me take control on valuation day. I will speak with the valuer in advance. I will go through our process for a successful valuation, both before the valuation day and on the day. And that's what we did. We met with the valuer. We went through that process.
It's just tweaked. I was trying to rack my brain who you were talking about. I've just remembered the whole process. didn't we not have a conversation with the landlords before and said to them, don't go for the valuation yet?
Yes.
They were super keen to do it because they needed to refinance.
Yes, because they had literally just rented the property. We said that you need to probably give it a few months so we can prove the income.
Yeah.
The HMO license was going through, but we hadn't actually got the license in our hand. And, they just wanted to get it done as soon as possible, did everything they thought they were doing right. But I guess just not understanding or just not having that little bit of experience that we've had, because we've had those horrible down valuations. We've had, the nil valuations. We've had everything in between.
That's how we learn. That's how we've learned to develop our process, which, touch wood, has been pretty much foolproof.
It has. And it worked for them. And I was so, so pleased. And that £120,000 valuation for valuation number 1, valuation number 2 was £254,000, which is fantastic for them. That's exactly sort of where they wanted it, probably a little bit more than they wanted. And that's just the power of experience, isn't it?
I mean, these guys are good guys. They're good guys. We have come across landlords in the past who have been a little bit of no-tools.
Which is not these guys, is it? Not at all.
And
they just had a rough ride.
Wanted to go their own way and only to come back with their tail between their legs. The whole valuation process is a science. It's 70% science, 30% art. And there's a process that you follow which captures a whole bunch of things directly and indirectly. And if you have not gone through that process, or have not been taught or trained to go through that process, you'll mess up. We something that we are happy to share with our landlords or investing partners. But a simple example are those people that don't turn up for the valuation.
Oh gosh!
If you don't turn up for the valuation, the valuer can do what the hell he wants.
And who knows what the tenants are going to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a crucial thing. And that's probably one aspect of about 15 or 20 steps that we process when we look at a valuation, depending on the size of the property, depending on what sort of valuation they get. And we cover all the bases. I remember, I was speaking to a landlord in Burton who she was valuing her property and it was someone that I mentored years ago. And she's had a bit of a rough ride. So I give her a little bit of friendly advice every now and again. I remember sort of a day before the valuation, she called me up and she was really panicking. She was like scribbling down all the notes. I told her, make sure you do this, make sure you put that in, make sure you get that done, and she came back with a valuation of, I think it was something like 40 or 50% greater than she had last time, and the valuation went wrong. So we have a trial and tested process. And, how many times have you heard me say, Amanda, that the end value, the done up value, is the most important value when it comes to buying the property? Totally. That done up value, that GDV, that final valuation determines how much money you're going to make, how much money you're going to take out, what you're going to fit the profit for profit if you're doing a buy and resell. It's the most important. It's one that we've got to get right. People get excited about the purchase, but what you need to get excited about is the valuation, the end valuation when it's all done. And, it's crucial. So it's great that these guys got the valuation that they wanted. I'm really, really happy for them. And it's important. And I think in this environment, it's crucial to get a good valuation. And to be fair, I mean, we did a valuation on one of our properties fairly recently, and I think he came back at 240, but we only took 200.
Yeah.
Because the other aspect of it is that, yes, you can take all your money out and some. This was the case in our situation. But the cash flow with this high interest rate environment, the cash flow that would have been made was derisory. It just wasn't worth it. So we said, look, you know what? We're happy. We take a £200,000 valuation. We get all but £10,000 of our money out, but we still have a fairly decent cash flow.
And that brings down the loan to value as well, doesn't it? Which is helpful.
Absolutely. So I think the message here, ties in with what we're saying. In this environment, you have to double down on how you go about with doing your valuation to get the result that you just shared with them. And there is a lot of things to consider. Valuers are beholden to the lenders. Lender can say, drop everything by 10%. You'll never see that on a piece of paper, but they can say that because they think the market's a bit puppy and they want to, be a little bit more prudent. You get good valuers, you get really horrible values that you should avoid like the plague. Amanda's probably flashed with more values are not how it's well expressed.
Well, it's often me that ends up doing the valuation day, being on the ground a little bit more. And we have, unfortunately, and I would have shared this with some of our listeners in the past, had valuers that have spent 2 hours in the property, up in the loft, down in the cellar, asking every question you could imagine, walked out the property, gave it a nil valuation and said there's no demand for HMOs, even though the property's fully let and we've got a couple of hundred in the area. Just completely just screwed the valuation. So needless to say, we avoid that one particular valuer like the plague. But on this valuation that we're referring to in Crewe, the valuer was very detailed. Very, very detailed. Now, one little tip I will have is, where possible, connect with the valuer way in advance of the valuation. So on this example, the actual walkthrough of the property was almost the last 10%, because she had already made up in her mind largely what that property is going to be valued based on the information that I had sent her. This was basically, does this thing exist? Yes, it does. Okay, great. But when she turned up, I hadn't met her before, and it's always nice to meet a female valuer, as we don't meet that many. I turned up, never met her before, and she said to me, my colleague remembers you from a past valuation in Crewe, and he said to me, if you're meeting with Amanda, be ready for a high-spec property, which I just thought was just a nice little cherry on the top, because it just put her in the right zone for expecting quality. She had all the information up front. The valuation was more about connecting with her and making her trust me to make sure that the information was correct, and it all worked out. All worked out on the day.
Yeah, brilliant. So important and easily underestimated, this last stage. And it's the most important stage. So what's the last topic that we were going to cover?
Well, so there was two, really. We were going to talk about, on the subject of finance and costs, we were going to talk about renegotiating contracts with, whether it be supported housing providers or just other long-term corporate type agreements, because every calculation on your cash flow is important, isn't it? Perhaps just touch on that and that conversation you had earlier about Birmingham.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few conversations recently with our own properties on behalf of the landlords and some people that we're speaking to in Birmingham. And I mean, typically it's a longer lease. It's a 3 to 5 year lease. And as you come out of that, the whole world has changed. All of a sudden, right, your utilities have doubled, your interest rates have gone up. So when you're looking to extend that, what do you do? We had one recently, and there was a lot of back and forth, because typically these charitable organizations or quasi-housing associations or care organizations, they don't have as much flexibility as we would like. We can't just double the rent on them. There's government cutbacks. So there is some limitations. So we found that we should start a negotiation as early as possible. And that means 6 months before the end of the contract. You want to get a steer as to whether they want to stay there, and you should assume that they don't. And what that actually does, if they do want to stay there, it puts pressure on them to strike a deal sooner rather than later. Sometimes they have funding challenges where, not that they don't have the money, but they don't have confirmation of the contract to provide their service. But there's nothing you can do about it. That's their situation. They have to make the commitment. So start negotiating early, put together a presentation in terms of what's required. So, we can do that to assist. And that covers, things like what's happening in the market, what deals you've done in other areas, what people are willing to pay, and stuff like that. And so basically putting forward an argument and say, this is why we're presenting these new prices. If you're happy to go with them, we can extend. If you're not, then we'll shake hands and wish you all the best. And maybe we might meet up in the future, but that's it for now. This is where we come in, because we obviously in Stoke and Crewe and now other areas, we have a good feel as to what the market rates are then. So in terms of negotiation, if room rates are £700 per month, 3 years ago, they struck a deal £450 per month, then you're not going to sign a deal for £500 per month, which is probably what they would want to do. The market rate is now £700 a month. Yes, you're committed for 3 years. Maybe we'll bring it down to £640, but it's not going to start with a 5. And if they don't have the budget for that, then you know that you're either going into the market and just selling it as individual rooms as an HMO, or you're looking for other organizations that probably have a slightly different model and can afford that higher fee. So that's really the importance of it. Often, the situation in Birmingham was a unique situation where one of the properties is unlicensed before the whole Article 4 came in. in Birmingham. So that can be a little bit of a challenge that needs to be sorted out. They had a very low rental from an agent that was acting on behalf of the charity. So there's lots of scope for renegotiation, but start early, do your numbers. Everything goes back to the numbers. If you had to manage it yourself, i.e., renting it room by room, paying the bills, what sort of profit would you want? What's your cost basis? If you're looking for another organization to do bills included, then what do you want? How much money would that make for you? Are you comfortable with that for the next 3 years or 5 years? You can't go into negotiate without knowing your numbers.
Yeah.
You got to do your numbers. And we can help landlords in that position to go through those numbers.
And I think also it's to be confident, isn't it, in terms of going into that negotiation. Don't feel that you have to offer something super low, and be sort of brave that actually, yes, these are the numbers that work for me and this is what I'm going to put forward. I think on the last one that we did, you did quite a jump on the price. And I thought, oh gosh, that's a pretty large increase. But rents had gone up so significantly in that period. So we had to do it. And the providers understand that as well, because if they had to go and then resource a new property, they would be faced with market rents also.
Yeah. And, if the property has served well, it's, better the devil you know, in as much as, they're comfortable, they know the workings of that particular property. So if they want to continue, they don't really want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a matter of finding that point where they're comfortable with. And it is negotiation. It is negotiation. It is the care sector or the charitable sector. Does that mean you should be charitable with those clients? No. You're running a business and you want to do what's right for you.
I think the part about care or caring is that where that shows up is in terms of the quality of the property we provide. Yeah. It shows up in terms of the compliance. So a couple of our properties in Crewe, we're in there every 6 months, emergency lighting servicing, fire alarm servicing, maintaining that property. So what we want to do is present quality, but we want to be paid well for the property we present. And I think that's okay.
Absolutely. I
think that's okay. Now, as our final subject on the numbers, let's just touch on utilities. For our HMO landlord listeners, this is always something that we're conscious of. We're conscious of it ourselves within our own properties. So Paul, just share with us some of the challenges this winter, which I feel like was better than last winter, to be honest, but just share some of the challenges that we've been going through.
Yeah, I think it was better than last winter because it was less of a shock.
Yes.
And this winter hasn't been as harsh in terms of the weather. But as I've said in previous podcasts, HMOs have stood the test of time. They've stood the COVID test and they're here to stay, which is great. And we were able to increase the rent on HMOs in the same way as single-let landlords have been able to do it there. So there's no inhibition, no issue with HMOs whatsoever. However, that said, the biggest challenge is controlling the utilities. And most HMOs are gas and electric. We have a couple that are electric only. That's a whole challenge by itself, but most are gas and electric. And we, a few years ago, ensured that all landlords had Inspire thermostat fitted so we can cap the heat. Over that time, we've had everything happen to try and scupper that plan by
the tenant. Yeah.
I think one ripped it off the wall and placed it outside so that it would always show within a cool temperature range. And they would just boost the housing temperature to whatever they wanted. I mean, they're very creative, very creative.
We've had it in the garden. We've also had it in the fridge.
Oh, yeah.
So we've had to now extra nail them, secure them to the wall. But that obviously comes with the sneaking in of the heaters and so on.
Yeah. And that's been the biggest challenge. Tenants know that we have to give 24 hours notice to visit their rooms. And if they know that, then they're going to hide the
electric heaters.
Electric heaters are very, very expensive.
Yeah.
We have some overseas tenants that don't understand why they can't have the heating on night because they come from a country where, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's still 25 degrees centigrade. So we've started to explore different options to assist us. And, fortunately, you were speaking to Inspire the other day, and one of the new products that they've come out with is a temperature control gauge in the room. So if there's a spike in the temperature, it'll alert you straight away that there's something going on in this room. Yeah. Someone probably got an electric heater.
Yes, it's a humidity and a temperature sensor. And like Paul said, put per room, they're about £80 each from memory, which is not a huge amount. But if you wanted to roll that out across a few hundred properties, it would be. But if you're doing a new development now, well worth putting them in from the get-go. So if your heating's off, but the room is 30 degrees, we know we've got a heater abuser that we can follow up on. And obviously a lot easier than constantly knocking on the doors and trying to get access and so on, which we do when we think we've got a problem. But it is pretty hard to manage.
Yeah. And I think the other thing in our most recent development, and one or two other landlords have gone down the same road, we've explored infrared heating.
Yes.
Which has a very low output compared to convection, or definitely compared to electric fan heaters, which they sneak in, and does a good job of warming the room. The reason we like that is because we can control the heating externally on a room by room basis, which enables us, if there's someone that wants a little bit more heat, we can then hypothetically say, yes, okay, fine, we'll take it up to 25 degrees, but you'll have to pay an extra £30 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So we've trialed that now. What it doesn't do is prevent them from bringing in fan heaters, which is where the challenge lies. So we spoke to a couple of our electricians that we have on team, and they looked at things that they could connect to sockets in each room, which almost breaks the circuit. It's almost like,
it cuts off. If there's a particularly high voltage that's going through that socket, i.e. a fan heater, it will kind of trip it or shut it off. I don't know the technical term, but it stops working, which is what we're looking for. And it's not just to make it crystal clear that it's not about having tenants that are cold and uncomfortable. It's about monitoring and controlling to an ambient temperature, because lack of ventilation, i.e. not opening the window, and excess heat through a heater leads on to our next issue that we have, which is mold. And if somebody is having a sauna in the room and not opening the window, there will get mold on the wall. And the next call from the tenant is, I've got mold on my wall. Can you come and clean it off? So not only are we paying for their heating, we're now paying for mold removal treatment. And it's just, that has to be put to a stop. So we manage it. We allow them to boost. It's ambient temperature, but all of this kind of excessive heat. And I have walked into houses pre-Inspire thermostat, and the heating is on 35 degrees. Nobody's home.
Yeah.
Windows open, etc., etc.
Yeah, and they don't care because they're not paying the bill.
Yeah.
So it's something that is an ongoing challenge. There isn't an instant solution, but there are things that we have that make it a little bit more difficult. The ultimate challenge is trying to prevent heaters being bringing into the property, which you can't. But if we do find, we do confiscate them. But that's in our terms of agreement.
It's in our terms, and also the HMO officer for crew, every time I see him, will remind me that they are a fire hazard. They should not be in the rooms under any circumstance. So we do ask them to be removed, and we just do our best on that. But I think our landlords, we communicate regularly on this subject. But I think the message is, install the smart meters, keep an eye on the bills, and alert your agent if you see a spike, because we're not telepathic and we need to know. And if your energy is spiking, we will then, we'll knock on the doors and we'll see what's going on.
I think the infrared heating that we're testing, the app that we have, I don't know whether you've looked at the app in detail, but I suspect the app will give the temperature of the room.
It does, yes.
And if there's a spike in that temperature in the room over and above what the infrared heating is set at, then that will be an indication that there's some other form of heating. So we'll be able to tell, and we can do reports if necessary to prove to the tenant what's been happening over a period of time. So that's the road that we're going down. As I said, HMOs have operated well through thick and thin, but this is, the one fly in the ointment, which is a challenge.
And if you don't know much about Inspire thermostats, please do drop me a message. I'm quite familiar with the lovely lady there who looks after us, and I can connect you in with her and she can tell you which is the best one to get and so on. But it is really it's very, very important that you have something like that or similar installed.
Just expand on that a little bit. Over the last few weeks, we've been approached by a number of investors, either new or existing, that either want to start in the HMO space or expand their portfolio and go from buy-to-let to HMOs or add more HMOs to their portfolio. And whether they're new or existing and want to do more, this is an area that we spend a lot of time talking about and how we manage that whole aspect. But in terms of the new biz who are looking to get into the HMOs, we're always happy to speak to new potential investors that want to move into the HMO space. One of the things that we should mention for crew, I think you brought it up the other day, we had a ongoing landlord who was battling with the council to get through planning, an existing property through planning, missed the Article 4 deadline, put in an application, was pushed back, but now has managed to get it through. And that's a ray of light, I think, and a reflection of how harsh Article 4 has been with regard to new developments and new accommodation for the town.
I think it's possibly the first one. I would need to go on the planning portal and do a double check. But I think it's the first or one of the first where planning has been required for, a straightforward 5-bed. And eventually, I think this has been ongoing for nearly 2 years. They've granted it. And I was so pleased for the landlord who has been battling away on an expensive fight against the planning department with his architect, but has eventually won.
Oh, brilliant.
So that's really good news.
And I think that's in discussions that we've had, that's a big part. If they're looking to set up shopping crews and HMO landlord, this is a big part of the conversation in terms of where you have to apply for planning, what the numbers are. There's some new legislation coming in terms of extending properties. What does that mean in terms of, can you go beyond six people in the room without planning required? Those are the conversations we've been having recently, and I'm sure as people become a little bit more emboldened with the potential drop in interest rates, they'll look to expand their portfolio and add more HMOs or add HMO to a buy-to-let portfolio going forward. And we're here on hand to advise them. It's part of our advisory service, portfolio advisory service, or New Start HMO advice.
And that's not just for existing landlords either. That's also for new investors that want to come on board and just use our advisory service. Whether you go on to do stuff with us directly or go on to do stuff yourself, we can still provide that sort of advisory service at the very beginning. So happy to help on that.
Brilliant.
I think that's it. This is our impromptu Monday night, 11 p.m. podcast episode recording. Paul said, let's do it now. Let's get on with it. So we've done it. We'll send it off to the editors and it'll be with you in a couple of days.
And I think we're probably making up. We've probably done quite a few podcasts since the beginning of the year. So we're making up for in the latter part of last year, which was thick with lots of things happening. So we're trying to make up for that, and we'll regularize and do our minimum one monthly. But if we can do more, we will.
I think we'll like to try and do 2, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Super. Okay, thanks for listening and look forward to sharing with you on the next episode.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if so, please hit subscribe and share with those who you think would enjoy it too. To get in touch with Paul and Amanda directly, please visit their website www.essentialpropertyoptions.co.uk for more information. We look forward to sharing with you on the next episode.